I'm the president of the board of directors of an organization called ARCH. That is called the Association for the Retention of Cultural Heritages. That's an acronym for that long term. And it is a historical and educational preservation organization interested in making sure that the community at large remembers, retains, and carries forward in the present and into the future the full cultural experiences of all of us who make up this country. And it's an effort that involves preserving facilities and also preserving memories, experiences, the recollection of certain industries and cultures that are no longer with us. It has to have been in existence for a reasonable period of time. It can't be 10 years old and be a landmark. I think 50 to 100 is a fair enough range to start with. I think too much younger than that, it hasn't acquired the value or the history that it needs to be called a landmark. At the same time, I think it has to have been a publicly utilized and publicly significant facility. Not that great things necessarily happened, but important things happened within it or at it. So that a community is actually preserving itself or a record of itself in preserving that facility. I think it becomes very important if communities are losing large numbers of traditional population. If there is a particular facility, building, entity that was the home or headquarters in some way, entertainment or otherwise, for that population that's now leaving, you want to leave a record of their existence. I think it's bad. I think the reasons that it's bad is that the funding and the spirit that are needed for it are lacking. I think the drive now is it's a commercialized period in which the things that are valued highly are not necessarily matters from the past. And the sources of funding are few, and they're strapped, and they're not directed towards all that could be preserved. So I think it's a difficult period for this kind of work.
How much influence and power do the national preservation organizations have, do you think, over whether buildings are declared landmarks or whether, say, a building is saved or not saved? Do you feel that these the National Historic Trust, organizations like that, do you feel they have enough power and or influence, and do you feel that they're using it wisely?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think they have a good deal of power that they can use. I think they cause a preservationist group to make decisions that are difficult. Because if one links up with the National Historic Trust, in combination with that, there are financial implications to the preservation work. They must be done according to certain understandings of the National Trust's society. And when one would wish to go about the same project less expensively, one can't be approved through the National Historic Trust. So one has to make a decision on that. Therefore, they have power, but the power that they have requires connections to funding. And in the funding connection, they don't have that same degree of power. They offer loans, which are not always the answer, but it's a very difficult funding process. I think that's where the power and the effectivity reduce. Mm-hmm. I think when one has it, it gives that particular location or facility prestige in its own eyes, but I don't think it is a security blanket of any kind, and I don't think that's where the protection lies. Part of the problem in trying to preserve what could be called a landmark or should be called a landmark, it might not have that designation yet, is that we're talking about groundswell or grassroots kind of efforts versus politically and economically organized drives towards progress. And inevitably, the organized position is stronger. Therefore, it has leverage on the legalities. It has leverage on the ability to demolish a standing entity based on condition or utility or public interest from another point of view. And those make it extremely difficult for the grassroots landmark historic preservation teams, which come together from all walks of life, but not with those same degrees of power, to reach their goals, especially within the time frames that they have to reach them. Sometimes a landmark effort gets put together because of the threat of destruction. And by the time you mount the effort to resist the destruction may already have taken place, or the demolition, I'm saying. Not necessarily for bad reason. Maybe they need to build a very needed facility and they like that site. But there's an inequality in the two sides of the issue, because they come, one probably has made its decision or has thought through where they want to locate something new far earlier than the group that realizes that something's on the chopping block or might go, and then the group that wants to resist it has to organize, get together, and rush. Get visible. Get vocal and visible first. If you can get an interview on, your local news station talking about your desire to save that facility, people come out of the woodwork in response. People who you didn't know before will respond to you, so long as you give them a contact number and articulate what it is you're trying to save and why, especially if you can give it the emotional connection. You grew up with it. It was something you attended. The following thing took place there that means a lot to you, to those around you, to this community. Touch the emotional heartstring, but do it as early as you can and as publicly as you can. If you do it among friends or through quieter channels, you don't get the response that you probably need.
And kind of related to
and I would just say, I think it becomes a political issue. It's not in a serious way, but in the concept of our democracy, that's a political issue, whether something will remain, which was historically built for a different purpose, or whether progress, economic, social, and political, requires its removal. I think there's a cost that is not being acknowledged or calculated now as things are taken away or disappear or become outmoded. And I think part of the problem is that we have entered a period in which many things on a technological level become outmoded practically instantaneously. It comes out 6 months later, it's already a thing of the past. That acceleration that has occurred over my lifetime makes one not nostalgic for what's gone before, but just to look forward. What's the next generation of this device or thing or look? And in doing that, we become a people who live for the moment. And in living for the moment, you lose an awful lot. You lose perspective on yourself, you lose perspective where you came from and where you're going. And so it's kind of a cultural advantage and an education advantage to retain, but the greatest challenge is to make retaining things seem worthwhile in a period when everything is throwaway, everything is discardable because something new has come out.
That's great.
Also, there's another problem. I think that's a big problem in this conversation, all of this is an education issue. Others, some would look at that round theater that you described and call it ugly, or call it camp, or call it something. And others look at it as a piece of history. Our tastes vary, and they're varying now at a rapid rate, which they were, you know, we had more stable tastes before. And I think that's part of the problem that we face in trying to preserve things, that tastes have shifted. There's what looks sleek in 1960 looks goofy in 2002 or 5. And you have to bridge that emotional reaction to something, especially if you're trying to draw a younger audience into it. There are those 50 years old, 60 years old and older who automatically respond because they're connected, or they know what caused it to be built that way, or think about that period and can relate to it 10 different other ways. But a youngster or a younger person looking at it has no connection to it, so looks at it cold. So it becomes an education issue. If our kids don't think in terms of the value of all that came before, architecturally and otherwise, and all they look to is the moment, the materialistic moment, and the future before them, there will be no reason to support the preservation.